Queen Victoria loved doing it with her husband, so much so that they made 9 children together. She also grew her empire to cover like a fifth of the world. Quite the overachiever. Welcome to the story of Queen Victoria. This is part 3 of the Queen Victoria story, and where we left off, we're in about the late 1850s, which is around the time Victoria and her cousin husband Albert start arranging marriages for their children. The first of which was Albert's favorite child, his oldest daughter, Vicky, who was married to Frederick III, King of Prussia, a title that would later morph to German Emperor. The couple were married in 1858 when Vicky was just 17. Albert and Victoria hoped that this marriage would help establish the British system within Germany, but instead it just made the Germans think that Vicky was a whack liberal bitch who didn't love German conservatism enough. So young Vicky wasn't having a great time. But hers wasn't the only political marriage. Albert and Victoria would marry almost all of their children into royal families across Europe, and those marriages would produce 42 grandchildren, hence Queen Victoria's later nickname as the grandmother of Europe. Also low-key passing down the hemophilia gene to all the heavy-hitting royal families. Romanovs. Putting all your children across Europe means that in the later generations, when World War I broke out, 3 cousins were on opposing thrones. Her grandchildren were rivals on the thrones of England, Russia, and Germany. When Germany started acting crazy, it became the largest family feud in history. But back to Queen Victoria. Victoria's mother would pass away in the 1860s, and Victoria would fall into a depression. A depression that would bottom out even further when her beloved husband/cousin Albert died on December 14th, 1861, aged at just 42. Keep in mind, Victoria has very conservative traditional values, and so she has let this man run her life since they got married in her early 20s. Victoria is completely lost, and she took his death incredibly hard, writing to their shared biological family that her happy life had now ended. She was so grief-stricken she could not speak at the next Privy Council meeting and withdrew herself from public viewing. And if she was seen, she was dressed completely in mourning black with bare bones jewelry. And one thing Vic and I have in common, we eat our feelings. So in her profound grief, she gained some depression weight, which made her withdraw from being seen even more. She grew incredibly self-conscious, but she did find comfort in her children, mostly meddling in their business. But with the queen out of the public eye, other than meetings with the government, it caused a lot of the people around to start wondering. Things like, what the fuck is the queen doing all day? And also, why the fuck do we have a queen? Because that shit is kind of ridiculous. And Victoria did stay out of the public eye for years and years. But she would pop out again eventually with a lot of coaxing from her family. Well, her family and the constant support of her 2 little servant boys that were friends. One of them, Abdul Karim, was from India, and he acted as her language teacher and taught Victoria her Indian culture and customs. And though there was a lot of rumors circulating of the 2 of them being a couple, Victoria refused to distance herself from him. Similar rumors were also flying about her other servant, John Brown. John spent a lot of time with Victoria, which was strange because he was a broke-ass commoner. Victoria paid no mind to the rumors of secret relationships with her manservants, however. And stepping back into politics after Albert's death was very scary for Victoria, who had followed her husband's lead for decades. But in her return, she supported things like the Reform Act of 1867, which strengthened voters' rights for men, and spent a lot of time and money expanding her already humongous empire. Since the British colonial system is a well-oiled machine. Step 1, do a lot of propaganda work to make the United Kingdom seem sick as hell. Step 2, go take people's shit. It's such an effective system that the empire accounted for like 1 in 4 people at some point. And there is lots of military conflict at this time, but there isn't anything on the British shore, so it's a pretty good time to be living in England. Trade is absolutely bumping, with the empire stretching across the Caribbean, Africa, and India, and Victoria's attitude towards the expansion of her empire really highlighted that she didn't get out much, because she really thought she was protecting these countries that Britain stole from evil empires taking them over. That call is coming from inside the house. In May of 1876, Victoria, a white woman, is crowned the Empress of India after a parliament vote. And by this point, England has had a long history of destroying India from the inside out in order to exploit its resources, with many of the Indian royal families being overthrown by British forces decades before. And we have diary entries from Victoria stating that she felt bad for the displaced princes. And I mean, clearly not that bad, girly pop. She also never visited India, but she apparently got very good at her Indian studies, which means nothing. And her public image at this point is one of a grandmotherly figure who runs this fabulous empire. And so she spoils herself with her 50-year jubilee, and then again for her 60-year diamond jubilee, which also doubled as a celebration for her breaking the the record in being the longest running English monarch at the time. And the Jubilees were absolute bangers, so everyone was excited. Even Queen Victoria, it's where we get that one picture of her smiling. Canada also held a mini Jubilee of sorts, but the Queen wasn't even there, so I don't know why they did that. And Ireland held a protest instead. But like I said, the Jubilees and being old really helped her be seen as the nation's grandmother. And as her reign continues to near the 20th century, industry has been fruitful, innovations are coming one after the other, and the middle and upper classes are getting richer, transport is getting faster, life is awarding more luxuries than ever before to people. We have a boom of literature and museums, and if you weren't dirt-ass poor, the Victorian era would have seemed fucking incredible. We got the railway, steamships, a population boom, streetlights, pavement, the camera, electricity, toilets, and gas inside the home, trade unions, voter protection, public education for children, big things. Because Victoria started her reign as a teenager and lived into her 80s, her reign was glorious, and she saw huge changes to life and culture in her lifetime. And by the end of her life, she was riddled down with osteoarthritis and was just a tiny little thing with a hunchback. And because she lived to be so ancient for the time, she unfortunately saw a lot of her family members pass away before her, like one of her sons and grandkids. Near the end of her life, she also lost almost all of her sight and her fighting spirit. She was kinda just accepting her declining health and fate. And with her family by her side, she died January 22nd, 1901, at the ripe age of 81 years old, while in her favorite grandson's arms. She was buried with her husband, cousin Albert, in a white dress and her wedding veil, and a picture of her favorite servant, John Brown, in a lock of John's hair. Oop. And that is the story of Queen Victoria. Thank you so much for following along. I loved reading all your comments about Queen Victoria. She is definitely a divisive one. If you liked this video, make sure you're following me here and anywhere else you can find me. I'll see you in the next one.